tow truck rolled onto my dock, its engine rumbling like it knew it was about to make a huge mistake. Sophie Ward, the HOA president, marched ahead like she was leading an army clipboard in hand, sunglasses on barking orders. "That boat's too big," she snapped, pointing at my pride and joy. "It's obstructing community access. Remove it." Before I could even raise an eyebrow, one of her board members tripped straight into the lake. The whole crowd burst out laughing. Sophie slapped a violation sticker on my boat, only for it to stick to her own shoe. That's when Sheriff Tom showed up, his hat low. "Ma'am," he drawled, "you got paperwork for this. You'll never guess what happened next." Sophie Ward had that look. You know the one. The kind that says, "I'm right, and you're just too small to matter." She strolled up to my dock with her clipboard flanked by her loyal lackeys and tried to act like she was the law of the land. To her, the HOA bylaws were gospel. Anything that didn't fit her definition of community standards was fair game for enforcement. "Your boat," she said, eyes narrowing, "is too large and violates our access codes. It's time to move it." I didn't even flinch. Sophie loved flexing her authority, but there was one thing she didn't know. This lake, this dock, and everything surrounding it, it was mine. Legally, historically, and for generations. My grandfather, Earl Sanders, had made sure of that. Sophie took a step closer, waving her hand as if she could just erase my rights with a flick. "This isn't negotiable," she snapped. "Community needs come before personal interest." But here's the thing, she never understood her community wasn't mine. Her rules didn't apply here. I'd watched her antics from the sidelines for months now, always thinking she'd eventually hit a wall. But today, she finally pushed too far, and I was ready to push back. Her smug little grin faded just a bit. She didn't know it yet, but her reign was about to come crashing down. It started small. Sophie's first letter to me arrived in the spring, sealed with the familiar HOA insignia, demanding I comply with aesthetic guidelines. The letter was full of nonsense about community harmony and how my boat violated some vague standard about public waterfront access. I tossed it in the wood stove, watching it curl and disappear in the flames. Then came the second letter, more formal this time. Sophie was getting serious. The boat, she claimed, was obstructing the view for her precious neighbors, who liked to enjoy their morning coffee by the water. This one didn't get burned, though. I filed it away right next to the deed and the original boundary maps. I figured that was it, that Sophie had just caught a little case of HOA fever. It happens to some folks when they get a taste of power, and I was hoping it would pass. But no, Sophie didn't take a hint. A few days later, she left a note at the end of my dock, telling me she'd sought approval from the board for a shoreline management plan, and that I'd need to consult with the HOA before making any further changes to my property. She was poking the bear, and I was beginning to wonder if maybe it was time to wake up. The third letter came a month later. This one was different. It wasn't just a suggestion or request anymore, it was a demand. Sophie wanted a comprehensive review of my boat and dock to assess its impact on shared community resources. I remember it like it was yesterday. One Tuesday afternoon, I was working in the boathouse when I saw Sophie standing on the dock. She was taking pictures of my boat, snapping shot after shot like some kind of property inspector. Her board members were with her, standing in the background, chatting amongst themselves. I stepped out onto the porch and caught Sophie's eye. She didn't even flinch. "Is there a problem, Sophie?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though inside I was beginning to feel the stirrings of frustration. "The boat's too big," she said, with that same arrogant tone, like it was a simple fact. "We'll need to remove it if you can't comply," I laughed. "This isn't a suggestion, Sophie. You can't just come onto my property and take pictures of it like you own it." Her smile tightened and she snapped one more photo. "I'm just doing my job," she said. "We'll see if we can get it resolved with the board." But I knew it wasn't just about the boat anymore. Sophie was pushing boundaries, and I wasn't going to let her take any more steps across mine. 2 weeks later, I found out exactly how far Sophie was willing to go. One Saturday morning, I was fishing off my dock when I noticed something strange. A big, bright red sticker had been slapped across the hull of my boat. "Violation," it read, in bold capital letters, with a list of infractions that looked like something out of a dystopian novel. I stood up, my heart pounding, as I walked over to inspect it. It was the same type of violation Sophie had been threatening, obstructing community access, exceeding size limits, damaging the aesthetic harmony of the lake. But the boat wasn't just some piece of property to me. It was my grandfather's boat. I could still hear him telling me how it had been the one thing that had brought our family together after his father's death. He'd carved his name into the hull years ago, and it was the one thing that tied me to that legacy, the thing that would carry me through whatever came next. I stormed over to Sophie's house, my temper rising. When I knocked on her door, she answered with that smug, confident grin, like she was already victorious. Your boat has to go, Carl, she said, almost sounding pleased about it. The board's made a decision. This will be handled. Handled, I asked, my voice rising. You're not just taking my boat, Sophie. You're taking my family's history. She shrugged like it was nothing. Community comes first. I stared at her, seeing red. This wasn't just an HOA violation anymore. Sophie had crossed a line and I was done standing by. I figured things had reached a breaking point when I saw the sheriff's cruiser pulling up to the driveway. Sheriff Tom, my brother, stepped out, hat tilted low, hands on his belt. Ma'am, he said, his tone, all business, you got paperwork for this? Sophie stood frozen for a second, looking flustered as she glanced at the tow truck driver who was nervously clutching the tow cable. It was as if she'd thought the law would just back her up because she had a clipboard. I've got the HOA's backing, Sophie snapped, but her voice wavered as she reached for the papers in her hands. Paperwork, Tom said again, his gaze steady. You've been trespassing on private property. This here is Carl's lake. Sophie's face turned bright red, but she didn't back down. We're just doing what needs to be done, she said, her voice shaky. Community access, public space, Tom raised an eyebrow. Public space, he asked, his voice dry. You really think that's gonna fly in court? I've been a sheriff long enough to know better. The tow truck driver looked like he was about to bolt. Sophie, on the other hand, squared her shoulders and glared at my brother, but she wasn't as sure of herself anymore. Ma'am, Tom said, his tone softer now, I'd advise you to pack it up and go. You're trespassing. Again. It was over for Sophie, she just didn't know it yet. By the time the next Saturday rolled around, I knew Sophie wasn't going to let go without a fight. The signs were everywhere, her truck parked at the marina, her board members standing around in their matching polo shirts, looking like they had a mission to complete. Sophie marched down to my dock again, clipboard in hand, like she owned the place. I stood there leaning against the railing with my coffee, just watching. Good morning, mister. Sanders, she called out, pretending politeness, but I could hear the tension in her voice. I trust you're ready to cooperate this time. I sipped my coffee, watching her closely. The fish are biting, I said casually, but the nonsense still stinks. Her smile tightened. We're not here for jokes. The HOA board reviewed your situation and voted unanimously to proceed with removal. Your vessel remains in violation of community size restrictions and obstructs shared shoreline access. I raised an eyebrow. The what? The view corridor, she said, her voice brimming with that smug certainty. The view corridor, she repeated confidently, like saying it louder would make it real. I stood up and walked toward her. Right. The view corridor. Go ahead, Sophie, show me the paperwork. She rifled through her binder, desperately searching for anything to back up her claim. Nothing. Seems like your paperwork's stuck, Sophie, I said, my voice low, just like last time. And that was when I knew. Sophie wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was about to learn a hard lesson in who owned the lake, and it wasn't her. Sophie wasn't backing down, not now. She stormed down my dock again, this time with backup, a lawyer, some board members, and even a camera crew in tow. The whole scene screamed of desperation, but Sophie wore it like a crown. Her heels clicked on the wood with every step, her voice cutting through the air like she was delivering an ultimatum. This is official business, she shouted, holding up a thick stack of papers like they could scare me into submission. We're here to enforce the rules. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. The rules. The ones you've been making up as you go along. She shot me a glare, but I could see her confidence wavering just a bit. Behind her, her lawyer looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She turned to him for reassurance, and he flipped through his papers, looking a little too nervous to be convincing. Carl Sanders, she said, trying to sound authoritative, this boat needs to be removed, or there will be serious consequences. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Sure, Sophie, I said, my voice steady. But first, let's talk about your so-called jurisdiction. You see, it ends right where my property line begins, and I've got the paperwork to prove it. Sophie's face turned pale. She wasn't expecting this. The crowd on the dock had gone quiet, watching us like it was a high-stakes drama, and it was. But Sophie hadn't read the fine print. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick stack of documents I'd been holding on to for weeks. You're not the only one with paperwork, Sophie, I said, handing them to Tom. I've got the deed, the legal descriptions, the boundary surveys, and the county's official maps. Not to mention the title to the marina. Sophie's smug expression faltered. Her lawyer took the papers and flipped through them quickly, his face paling more with each page. This can't be right, he muttered under his breath. I stood there, arms crossed, letting the weight of the moment settle in. Everything I just handed you, that's legal proof that the lake, the marina, and everything around it belong to me. The HOA has no claim over any of it. Not the boat, not the dock, not the water. I turned to the crowd. And to everyone here, this is why we don't let people with clipboards and a lot of talk walk all over us. We know the law. We know our rights. The crowd began murmuring, glancing at Sophie and her team, like they could smell the defeat in the air. The camera crew looked like they didn't know which way to point their lenses. Sophie's lawyer tried to recover. "We're not finished here," he stammered, but the confidence was gone. His voice was shaking now. Sophie, however, wasn't finished. She stood tall, but I could see the cracks starting to show. She wasn't ready to concede, not in front of everyone. "I'm not going anywhere, Carl," she snapped, trying to maintain her grip on the situation. "This is community property. I'll take this to court." I stepped forward close enough for her to feel the weight of my words. "Sophie," I said, my voice calm but firm, "the court's already made its decision. This is private property, and you're trespassing. Keep pushing and you'll be slapped with another charge. You can't bully your way through this anymore. It's over." Just then, there was a loud rumble down the road, the sound of an engine, unmistakable. A white van appeared, pulling up to the marina, followed by a Coast Guard cruiser. 4 officers got out their uniforms, crisped their posture professional. The crowd held its breath. Sophie's eyes widened as one of the officers stepped forward, holding a clipboard of his own. "Good morning, folks," he said, his tone polite but firm. "We received a report of an unauthorized maritime seizure attempt. Is everything in order here?" Sophie opened her mouth to speak, but the officer didn't give her a chance. "Ma'am," he said, looking at Sophie directly, "are you attempting to enforce a maritime removal without federal jurisdiction?" Sophie faltered. I'm trying to enforce community regulations." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And what community regulations would those be? Because community regulations don't extend to navigable waters or private docks. Do you have documentation from the county?" Sophie's hands shook as she fumbled through her binder, pulling out half-baked paperwork, none of it official. The officer didn't even glance at it. "These aren't legal documents," he said coldly. "You can't enforce HOA bylaws here. This is private property, and we're not going to let you trespass anymore." The crowd erupted into laughter. Phones were out again, filming every moment. Sophie's face turned a deep crimson, her attempted authority unraveling in front of everyone. Just as she tried to slap a violation sticker onto my boat once more, a gust of wind caught it, sending it fluttering right onto her shoe. The crowd howled with laughter. Even the officer couldn't suppress a smile. Sophie was done. Her entire charade was collapsing in real time, her authority slipping through her fingers like water. With a final look of defiance, she snapped, "You'll regret this." Tom stepped forward. "Not today, Sophie. Not anymore." As the Coast Guard officers walked off the dock, their boots heavy against the wood, the laughter from the crowd was deafening. Sophie was left standing there looking like a queen with no throne, no crown, and no respect. The laughter still echoed across the marina as Sophie's SUV was towed away, its tires squealing in protest as it was dragged off the property. The crowd on the dock slowly began to disperse, their cheers still hanging in the air like the final notes of a song. People were shaking their heads, grinning from ear to ear, some even high-fiving each other as they gathered their things. I stayed on the dock watching the last remnants of Sophie's entourage slink away in shame. Her board members, once so eager to back her up, were nowhere to be seen now. It was like a weight had been lifted off the entire neighborhood. Sophie had tried to control us, to tell us what to do with our homes, our lake, our lives. But the moment her lies started unraveling, the community found its voice again. Tom walked up beside me, his boots crunching on the gravel. He held up a cold bottle of beer, the label peeling off. "Well, I gotta say, Carl," he said with a grin, "I never thought I'd see the day the HOA president gets towed in front of the whole damn neighborhood." I chuckled, accepting the bottle. "Yeah, not exactly the victory lap I was expecting, but I'll take it." I glanced around at the people still gathered on the docks. You know, for a minute there, I thought this might never end. But today it feels different. Tom nodded, his gaze sweeping across the lake. "It's not just the boat that's gone. It's the fear, the worry, the control she tried to use to divide everyone. You just made the lake free again, Carl." I took a long sip of beer and looked out at the shimmering water, the setting sun casting its golden light over everything. "Yeah, it's funny," I said quietly. "It wasn't about the boat, or the dock, or even Sophie. It was about keeping something worth protecting safe, keeping it alive." The next few days brought a quiet sort of relief. The calls I had been expecting from lawyers never came, and the barrage of HOA letters stopped cold. It didn't take long for the community to realize that things had changed. There were no more fines being issued, no more threatening emails or violations to worry about. And the best part, Sophie's own credibility was in ruins. By Wednesday, I received a package at the cabin. It was from the courthouse. I opened it carefully, expecting the usual legal mumbo-jumbo, but this time it was different. It was a formal notice from Judge Whitaker himself. The lawsuit Sophie had filed against me was dismissed with prejudice. The ruling stated that the Lakeview HOA had no legal jurisdiction over the lake or its surrounding properties, and the HOA's actions had been deemed frivolous and without merit. The court also ordered the HOA to pay all my legal fees, something Sophie had never anticipated. It was a small victory in a long, drawn-out battle, but it was enough to seal the deal. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I had made sure Sophie's reckless abuse of power would cost her and the HOA more than they'd ever bargained for. And that wasn't the end of it. Word had already spread through the neighborhood that Sophie had tried to file an appeal, but her case was denied before it even got to court. The media had picked up on the story, and local businesses were getting in on the fun, offering discounts with signs that read, "No HOA, no fines." The whole town was laughing. Sophie had been the villain of the story for so long, and now she was nothing more than a punchline. By Friday, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't just that the fines had stopped, or that the constant fear of Sophie's next move was gone. It was the sense of unity that had returned. For years, the HOA had made us feel like we were living in someone else's house, constantly on edge, always waiting for the next violation. But now we were free. That Saturday, we threw a party. Nothing extravagant, just a barbecue by the lake, some cold drinks, and the kind of music you could hear echoing off the water. Kids ran around chasing each other with squirt guns, while the adults kicked back in lawn chairs, laughing and swapping stories. The whole community came out to celebrate, even those who had kept their heads down in the past. I stood at the edge of the dock, watching the kids skipping stones across the surface, their laughter filling the air. The sunset turned the water to molten gold, and I couldn't help but think of my grandfather. He'd been a man of few words, but the ones he had shared with me were always about protecting what mattered: family, home, and this lake. Today, the lake was free, and the community was free. Tom joined me on the dock, holding up another cold bottle of beer. "Guess you finally did it, huh?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, taking the bottle from him. "We did it. All of us." Tom grinned. "You know, you're a legend now, right? The guy who took down the HOA?" I chuckled. "I'm just the guy who read the fine print." As the evening wore on, the last few stragglers started to leave the fire pit, slowly dying down. I sat on the porch, looking out over the water, letting the calm settle in. The place had been through so much, but now it felt like it had returned to its roots, peaceful, quiet, and free. I picked up my grandfather's deed one more time, the one that had survived generations. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink, a reminder of all the times I'd sat at that desk trying to protect what was mine, what was ours. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered softly, staring out at the shimmering water. "We kept it safe. We kept it ours." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a fiddle across the water, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace.